Are you guys curious about how a $14,000 streaming hi-fi Marantz preamp performs on the test bench? That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Hey folks, I'm Gene Delasello with Audioholics. I am a fortunate soul. I get to play with the very best audio gear in the industry. I've been doing this a long time. And when Marantz announced the 10 series of hi-fi components, I just had to get one in. And what I asked for was the Link 10N. This is a 2.1 channel streaming hi-fi preamp. I want to show you the beauty of this thing before we get into the test bench results, the scale of this kind of product. And yes, it's not inexpensive at 14 grand, but I've never brought in a 2.1 channel preamp with no amplifier section in it that weighs 73 pounds. This thing is built like a tank and it's so elegant and beautiful. I love the artwork, the TFT display on it. I've got it paired with my Marantz TT15S1 turntable. Love this turntable. I've got a network player, the Marantz SACD30N, because I listen to a lot of CDs as well as streaming. And then I have this system hooked up with RBH SFTR AX active speakers, and I'm using the high performance Kimber cables. They're iconoclast cables wired the whole system up. So this is a great system. It's right behind me. It's right here. And this is what I listen to when I'm in between doing content and just wanting to chill and listen to 2-channel music. And prior to having the Marantz in here, I had the Anthem STR preamp for many years. Love that preamp. But this is a different beast. This one actually does streaming. This has HEOS built in for music management. It does Tidal Connect, Apple AirPlay, you name it, you could stream it. It's got a really high quality Phono moving coil and moving magnet preamplifier stage with different impedance settings. The DAC has multiple settings, and we'll get into that into the test report. And it has a USB DAC, so if you want to plug in a NAS, I mean, you can stream every kind of file format to this. But I want to go over the test bench results with you guys. I'm going to share my screen here. And I do encourage you guys to read my review. I put a lot of effort into this review. I talk about my listening test results as well in the video, as well as the review. You can see it on our homepage right there. And look at the internals of this thing. It's got a huge toroid power supply. Everything's separated. It's got the HDAM circuitry. That's a Marantz proprietary analog circuitry that gives them their signature sound. You can just see how beautiful all the copper layout is on here. Multiple layer PWBs, just really high quality, high integrity. The chassis itself is really stiff, no resonances on it. The back of the unit has incredible connectors. It's a work of art. And ironically, it's a fully differential design. Everything is balanced except for the subwoofer out, but I'll get to that in a little bit. But you can see you've got digital inputs and outputs, coax and optical. You've got XLRs, you've got the USB DAC, you've got HDMI ARC. If you want to plug your TV or your streaming device into it, you could do that as well. And there I am. I'm really loving this thing, right? So let's get into the measurements. We're going to start with using the digital input. I wanted to make sure that the Link 10N handles digital sources as it should perfectly for a $14,000 preamp. And the frequency response with a 192 kilohertz sampling rate, 0 dBFS, is 3 dB point is like 50 kilohertz. So it's way beyond hearing capability. Very transparent, very linear. Did not clip at 0 dBFS. It handled it just fine. The SINAD on it is excellent. This is the unbalanced output, and I believe it was about 95 dB SINAD, a little over 2 volts. That's excellent. Now, this unit is capable of 10 volts RMS out from unbalanced, 20 volts RMS for balance. That's way more drive than you would ever need to drive any amplifier into clipping. But I love that because there's a lot of headroom in this preamp, meaning it behaves really well in the operating region that you're going to be using it with. Most amplifiers is between 2 and 4 volts. This does really well. On the unbalanced, you get 94 dB SINAD, which is excellent. But because this is a differential design, that means it has twice the components. There's no ground reference in the signal path at all from input to output. Much more complicated to make a design like this, much more costly. in telecom, this is a necessity. You have to do differential design. Otherwise, you won't get the really low noise, low distortion kind of transmission for small signal. So it's a huge advantage. And I'll show you that now. So we went from 94 dB SINAD at unbalanced. And when you go to balanced, the distortion gets even better. We're looking at 98, almost 100 dB here. And it's just super clean. Actually 102 dB at 8 volts RMS. So this thing is really some of the best, lowest distortion preamp that I've seen with a digital input driving it. Excellent, just really excellent. I could not get this preamp to clip. As you could see, I just ran out of gain. And that's with a max digital signal input. And if you look at the FFT here, unbalanced source direct, it's clean. The second order harmonic is about 106 dB below the fundamental. So that's a really good measurement there. Nothing to be worried about here. But when you switch to balanced, that's when it becomes a real animal here. Now you're down to 110 dB. You can see all the residuals are much lower. There's no ground issues or anything like this. This is just a really clean preamp. It's just beautiful. I love seeing measurements like this. And when we look at the signal to noise ratio, I started with Redbook, which is 44 kilohertz, 16-bit. That's CD. And I wanted to make sure I could do theoretical SNR perfection. So it's 16 bits is 96 dB. You got perfection here. And I do recommend you use source direct. It didn't matter as much with CD, but it mattered with higher resolution signals. And we'll get into that a little bit. So with a 192 24-bit signal, I got about 112, 113 dB SNR at 4 volts out with 0 dBFS in. This is a good measurement. It's not the best. There are some DACs on the market that'll get you close to 120 dB, but I know Marantz does a lot of post-processing with their HDAM circuitry, so that might have given a little bit of a penalty for absolute SNR. But there's advantages to how they tune their sound circuits, and there's people that like that signature sound. So we're splitting hairs. When you're talking about 112 dB versus 120 dB, it's something that's not audible. This is just a bench test number because it's so good already. And what's interesting here is there's different filter settings, and I want to show you that real quick. So Marantz on their DAC, this only applies to the DAC. It doesn't apply to the analog input. It doesn't apply to anything other than digital. So you have filter 1 and filter 2. Filter 1 is what they call short impulse response for pre-echo and post-echo. This is the one that it defaults to. This is the Marantz Sonic signature one, but it doesn't measure perfectly. And I've seen in the past when people have bench tested, like Audio Science Review have measured Denon and Marantz products, mostly the Marantz ones, with the default setting. They didn't get perfect bench test results, but the sound masters claim that this is their preferred sound. So they recommend using filter 1. Filter 2 gives you the more sharper characteristic of the roll-off. We talked about this with the Benchmark Media live stream. You should go check that out in our live stream tab. This is what gets you better bench test results. And I'll talk a little bit about my listening results in a second, but you could see here, filter 1 is a slower roll-off, and there's some out-of-band noise that's pretty high. I was actually surprised to see it. It's down, minus 80 dB. It's not something that's going to blow a tweeter or anything like that, but it's just from an aesthetic standpoint, it doesn't look pretty, but this is deliberate. And then if you look at filter 2 setting, it's a sharper roll-off, more like a brick wall, and it's cleaner out here. Now, I spent a good amount of time trying to listen between filter 1 and filter 2. And it's strange because you could do an instantaneous switch and you can have someone do it for you. So it's a blind test. Most of the time I thought I preferred filter 2. Things sounded a little cleaner to me or a little sharper to me. But there's times where I throw it on filter 1. I'm like, you know what? I just like it. So I would tell you guys to experiment. And the filter setting is most important with lower sampling rates. Once you increase the sampling rate and you get past the audio band, past the Nyquist, it doesn't matter really which filter setting you use. Look at the sampling rate for 96 kilohertz. Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference here, but this is above 50 kilohertz here, so it doesn't really matter. And then when you go to 192 kilohertz, it's inconsequential, whatever filter you use. And I talk about all of this here. And I do recommend, again, encourage you guys to read this review. And there's also different settings for the dither and noise shaping. And I could see in the user manual, it gives you the explanations here. I preferred the dither 1, but it was like splitting hairs. I mean, you have to really listen. I didn't listen with headphones. I did most of my listening with speakers. It's possible if you put headphones on and you're in a more acoustically controlled space with headphones, you might hear a bigger difference. And I encourage you guys to try these different settings if you have one of these products and give me some comments down below. But I use Dither 1. And then for noise shaper, I use balanced. I found that was the best measuring. I didn't really hear major differences between switching between them, but everybody's different in their hearing capabilities, their room acoustics, their speaker resolution. And to really understand if there's differences, it has to be a controlled test, because if you start flipping it, you're going to think you prefer one over the other. You know you're flipping it so you could trick your mind. So that's why if you're going to do this, try to do it in a controlled way. Have your wife or your significant other help you move that around. And I wanted to look at the crosstalk performance out of the preamp outputs. And it's like a monolithic construction because there's so much isolation in this unit. The channel to channel separation is superb. We're looking all the way to 20 kilohertz. You're at like minus 111, 114 dB from channel to channel isolation. Anything greater than 60 or 70 dB at 20 kilohertz is excellent. This gives you really good stereo separation, the best you can get. It's like monoblock design here. So kudos for their layout, for all their isolation efforts. It paid off, and you can see that in that measurement. Now I want to switch over just to the analog input and the XLR outputs, because this thing is a beast when you use it as an analog preamp. You could see that the frequency response driving a analog input to the XLR, and XLR versus unbalanced outputs, it's transparent. It's flat all the way to the limit of my test gear, which is around 80 something kilohertz. It's like a straight line. So there's no coloration in this preamp. It just perfectly measures. And if you look at the FFT, this is the balanced source direct, and it's down 111 dB from the fundamental at 2 kilohertz. And I always recommend using source direct, because I've seen measurements that are sometimes 10 dB better with source direct, especially with digital sources coming in, than the analog ones. So use the source direct. I do recommend you using that whenever you can. And if you look at the unbalanced outputs, they're not as good as the balanced. Again, this is the advantage of the fully differential design. I encourage you, if you buy this product, don't use the unbalanced. Use the unbalanced for the subwoofer output only, but use balance for everything. That's why you bought this. You bought this for the very best performance. You bought it for the very best engineering that Marantz offers. There's very few products on the market that give you fully complementary designs from input to output. So always use balance. So there's a big difference here in measurements. I'm not saying it's necessarily audible, but you can see the second harmonic is only minus 89 dB as opposed to when it was balanced, it's at minus 111. That's a huge difference. That's like almost 20 dB. And I want to show you now the dynamic range test that I ran. This is signal to noise ratio basically from the analog input with 4 volts in, 3.16 volts out. This is how Marantz specifies their SNR. They specified 122 dB. I measured 123 dB. So we beat their spec, which is great. That's an incredible measurement. That is basically 24 bits of resolution if you equate that to a digital SNR. But this is through the analog stage. So the analog stage of this preamp is dead quiet. It's like comparing the black levels of the very best TVs versus the older LCDs, like OLED versus LCD. It's just incredible black levels, really dark, quiet. That's the best way I could describe it. And I just love the way it looks when it's right next to the TT15S1. Let's go over the phono stage. So the phono stage is a bit strange, but it measures really well. There is a bump below 20 hertz at around 5 to 10 hertz. And this has to do, Marantz explained this to me. I'm going to read this to you. When I discussed this with Marantz Engineering, they informed me that the bump is an amplitude response below 20 hertz is caused by the DC servo circuit, which compensates for DC offset generated by the phono EQ amplifier's fully discrete, non-feedback design. While essential to protect connection equipment, the servo slightly affects frequencies outside the audible range. So yes, this is not audible. This is really low frequency. But in practice, what I noticed was you have to be a little more careful with your setup of your turntable. I found that I had a little bit more rumble with the TT15S1 when I switched from my Anthem STR to this one, because there's no subsonic filter in this. So I had to make some adjustments on my turntable to compensate. But between the moving magnet and moving coil, they both measure excellent. They have tons of gain capability. So in order to drive moving magnet properly, you need 5 millivolts RMS for most cartridges, and you need 0.5 millivolts RMS for moving coil. This thing was clean out to driving up to 20 millivolts easily. So there's plenty of headroom on this preamp. And Marantz historically has always had really excellent sounding measure and excellent measuring phono stages, and this is no exception here. The distortion is really low. You can see here, I ran this for the moving magnet. It's excellent noise and distortion here. The same thing with moving coil. Just everything I would expect from a Marantz flagship kind of product. And then we look at the signal to noise ratio here. And when we're doing moving magnet with source direct with 5 millivolts in and 1 volt out, you're at almost 90 dB, 88 dB. That means it's a really quiet phono stage. And that's what I heard when I was listening to records, whether I put on Phil Collins' Hello, I Must Be Going, or I put on Richard Marx, Remember Manhattan from his first album. I just heard that really dark, inky kind of sound that you get from a great phono preamp stage, and very transparent. The bass was tight, slamming. It just sounded great. The phono stage on this thing sounds excellent. Moving coil, of course, because of a smaller input signal, you're going to have more noise. And it was about 70 dB under similar test conditions, 0.5 millivolts in, 1 volt RMS out. I think Marantz spec'd it at 76. I didn't quite hit that. And I think it was just a difference in discrepancies in how they're testing versus I was. And I wanted to go over the low, mid, high settings of the phono stage. These settings refer to the switching of the input impedance of the moving coil input, and it allows the optimal input impedance to be matched to the cartridge being used. So I would consult with your dealer if you're going moving coil, because real analog purists and vinyl lovers usually prefer moving coil over moving magnet, but it's more finicky to set up because it's a much smaller signal. Last but not least, the subwoofer output. So the Link 10N doesn't have bass management. The main channels are full range. They give you a subwoofer output, and it's 6 dB per octave roll off at its whatever frequency you select for its crossover, and then it's 12 dB per octave after that. I would have preferred to see 24 dB per octave personally. They give you 20 hertz increments from 40 hertz to 120 hertz. What I would recommend if you're going to use a subwoofer in your system is set it to the highest setting and use the subwoofer crossover built into your sub. That would be my recommendation if you go that route. So most people that are buying the Link 10N are going to probably use full range speakers and not even use a subwoofer or use the subwoofer output, or they might get towers that have the bottom section powered like I have with my RBHs here. So the bottom line is this is a really sophisticated, but it's an incredibly designed preamp, and it's a master of all sources that it takes in, whether it's analog or digital. It just sounds great. It looks great. It dresses up your room. It's a conversation piece kind of product. Yes, it's expensive, but you know what? If you're on the market for something in this price range, this is something to really consider when you're looking at the Macintoshes and you're looking at all the high ends, the Past Labs and all that stuff. Very few products are built to this caliber. So don't just discount Marantz because it's not one of the traditional players in the really expensive 2-channel market. This is a serious product. So guys, I hope you liked this video. If you have any comments about it, give me them down below. I wanted to let you know on November 8th, we're doing another listening event at Maximum AV with JTR. JTR is bringing the Kalos speakers and their subwoofers. We're going to have food. We're going to have booze. We're going to have a good time. It starts at 5 o'clock. It's in Tampa. I'm going to be putting more information in the community tab on our social media. So follow us on Instagram, Facebook. Watch our YouTube community. I'll do more videos about this as we get closer to the date. These are a blast. I love bringing people into a showroom to hear products because we don't demo over YouTube. We want you to come and hear the products for yourself. So guys, I appreciate your time watching this video. Please hit the thumb up, hit subscribe. Don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.